Hello, the initiated. My name is Markus, Junnikkala, and this is the Be a Better Artist show. This week, I wanted to answer a question from a friend, a fellow musician, and a fellow initiated artist. And translating this question from Finnish roughly goes like this. What should you do when everything you work on sounds like shit? So this is undoubtedly a question and a feeling that has been on the minds of more or less every single musician and artist that has ever existed. You recognizing that your music is lacking is a very positive problem because it means you're on the path of getting it somewhere else, getting it to a better place. So when you hear those lacking qualities and when it sounds like shit, that's great because you're actually recognizing what's missing. And if you're doing that, then that's the first step and the first requirement to turning it into something better. You will struggle to defeat this challenge if you are always contextualizing your difficulties with your music as being negative. You need to find ways to reframe this experience and these observations in a positive light. And I think this is an important aspect to deal with because when we listen to our music and it sounds lacking, it sounds lackluster, there's a feeling of desperation that comes along with it. And you can really feel like you suck, everything you've ever done sucks, you'll never be good, and so forth. And that's a negative loop that you need to be fighting against as much as you possibly can at every single corner. So when you recognize yourself thinking about how shit your music, your work is, my invitation to you is to reframe those observations as something that are in the service of a positive pursuit. Now, otherwise, I would split my answer to this question to basically two categories. The first one is that your observation is true and very, very real. And the second one is that your observation is untrue. I think it's important to recognize that if you're not feeling it, if the music sounds lacking or shit, then there's probably a lot of truth to that. Actually, I'm going to remove the probably word from there altogether and say there is truth to that. In fact, it's true. Let's put it that way. And again, when the music sounds like shit, when you feel and hear that something's missing, that's a sign of you recognizing and realizing that I don't have the full picture put together here. And what's missing from the picture could be creative ideas, could be production ideas, could be arrangement ideas, could be mixing ideas. So what you're actually observing, what you're hearing is everything that's missing, everything that's lacking. And the answer to how to remove that is to acquire skills, to get better at mixing, to get better at music production, to improve your arrangements, do better sound selections. So the solution isn't just to change your mindset, look at it from a different perspective. Primarily, the solution is acquire new skills, learn, train, develop your understanding of songwriting or composition or arrangement or mixing or playing or recording, whatever it is. There are plenty of skills that all of us are missing all the time that would allow us to create better sounding music. So it's really important to recognize that if every day you put in work, developing your mixing skills, developing your songwriting skills, developing your playing skills, and honestly, it's probably a bit of all of those things. If you put in that every single day, that feeling of your music sounding like shit and that observation, the impact of that begins to gradually lessen because every day you see that I am actually getting better. I can mix this instrument better. I can play this part better. I can arrange instruments in such a way that this song sounds more impactful and clear. When you show and prove that to yourself constantly, then there's no reason to get hung up on the fact that your music sounds like shit, because every day it's sounding better. So that would be the first section of my answer, things that are true. Now let's get to the second point, which is things that are not true. And this is the mental aspect of our relationship with our observations. Now, there are plenty of subcategories that I could be putting into this section, because subjective perception is a very, very tricky beast. It's very difficult to give overarching answers that are going to be helpful and applicable to a lot of people, because fundamentally, for example, it's entirely possible that you have overinflated ideas of what your music sounds like, and in many cases you can have crushingly over-exaggerated ideas of how shit your music is. Now, in reality, I think a lot of us do a bit of both. So when we see a glimpse of a good aspect in our song, we tend to over-exaggerate its quality. And when we hear that something's not working, it's also very easy to allow that train of thought to spiral out of control. I think an overarching antidote to that actually links back to the first section of this episode, which is that if you can lose yourself in the process of simply focusing on improvement, that is one of the best ways of avoiding the pitfall of finding yourself looping these thoughts of how shit something is or how amazing something is. This is about mentally ensuring that you don't enter those holding patterns, those mental loops, because that's what really is causing the problem. The problem isn't listening to your track and observing that it sounds like shit. The problem is observing that it sounds like shit and then taking that in and beginning all the narratives of, oh shit, I've always been a shit musician. I always will be one. Have I actually ever written anything good in my life before? Am I a joke? Is everyone laughing at me? Can I do anything properly? Am I shit at playing this instrument? Is this all for nothing? You know this train of thought. Probably most of you do. You can't not put yourself on that carousel, because it will spiral out of control as much as you let it. The enemy is the negative holding pattern. It's the loop, it's the mental loop that you allow yourself to be on. You allow yourself to be a traveler on. And sometimes when those holding patterns are extremely strong and very well ingrained, it can be difficult to break the hold of that. But you are in control. You can step off the carousel. And one of the best ways of doing that is starting a new process. You being in that negative holding pattern, that loop, that's a process that you actively engage with. And now you need to replace that process with something else, which, for example, what I mentioned could be to always be sharply focused on not the big picture, because that can be tremendously overwhelming, but one small minute aspect. You know, today I'm gonna find the right compressor for this drum kit, or today I'm gonna make sure that I get the voicing of these chords right, or I'm gonna sing that one section of that song perfectly, or I'm gonna aim for that take that is gonna end up on the record. Focus on progress. Spend your time really on things that take the music forward as a whole. And if you get stuck, then take something else. If the drums aren't working, jump to the guitars, but always focus on moving things forward. If you can find yourself utilizing that as a key principle in your musical processes, then that can change everything for you. No more messing about, no more postponing decisions, no more procrastination. I'm going to do this because, well, I have time and that isn't working and this is that. And we all know these bullshit stories we tell ourselves. We know when we're wasting time. We know when we're not actually moving a project forward. You know, from a music producer's perspective, it's easy to find yourself in a place where you're twiddling about with a delay or compressor or some saturation, but you know you're not actually engaged in the process of moving this record forward. And you want to be very careful that you don't spend, I'd say, any time in that zone unless you're deliberately trying to be creative and, you know, shifting things around. That's a completely different story. But always focus on doing a thing that will take your album forward. And if whatever you're working on right now isn't working, you're not feeling it, that's fine. Take something else, but always focus on progress. If you do that, it's very, very difficult to find yourself in a spot where you're cycling these thoughts of negativity of how shit your music is. Because again, if you're engaged in the process of progress, then there's no room for negativity because you know that you're actively making the record better every time that you're working. Doesn't matter how slow it is, doesn't matter how small the progress is. Some days are smaller, some days are bigger. But you know that whenever I choose to sit down here and work on something, it's going to move this thing forward. I'm not going to delve too deeply into inflating that overly positive reaction because that wasn't really the question here. But I think it's important to keep an eye on that because a lot of the lows that we experience also come from the extreme highs that we either experience or generate, which in many cases I'd say that we create our own problems. When you overinflate, over-exaggerate some positive part of your music, you create this tremendous peak that is now essentially a point of reference, which is problematic because it doesn't actually exist in the sense that that part doesn't probably sound as good as you think. And when you push yourself up to that mountain peak, to that sort of a height, you see all the lacking qualities of your music. The fall coming down from that mountaintop is going to be pretty rough once you hit rock bottom. So you generate this sort of massive issue for yourself for overinflating how great some aspect of your music was. And then when you realize the big scope of the reality, the big picture of how it actually is, then it's going to be a devastating fall and it's going to feel really heavy. So I'm a really big fan of not allowing the high peaks or the low lows affecting you too much either way. So when someone is complimenting your work, don't allow it to overinflate itself. Yes, take it in, acknowledge it, appreciate it, but don't allow it to, grow into this massive beast that's really not representative of reality. And when you're really down low and you think that this song sucks, all of the music I've ever done sucks, everything that I've ever done musically sucks, I've always sucked and I will always suck, realize that that's probably not true. You are in a cycle of negative thought, you're in a negative holding pattern, you're in a negative cycle, a negative loop, and that easily spirals into this massive sense of desperation and despair. Now, I want to finish off by sort of addressing that overall negative approach a bit more. Even the wording of this question is very leading. Let me read that again. What should you do when everything you work on sounds like shit? Now, honestly, do you honestly think that absolutely everything that you do sounds like shit? Because if you really broke that down and analyzed it, you would find that not everything that you do sounds like shit. There are things that actually are good, things that sound good, either, compositionally, songwriting, or playing, or production. This question kind of hints towards a sort of a mindset of kind of a defeatist mentality of despair. As I said in the beginning, you really want to be careful of how you frame your approach to the challenges that you are facing. Because the reality of the situation is that not everything you do or have done or will do sounds like shit. You can surely go back through your catalog and listen to everything that you've done and see that there are things you have done right and you have done brilliantly. So the key thing here is to realize what sort of realities or framings you accept as a reality. And the way that you framed the question is that you've accepted that everything you do and have done sounds like shit, which I'm sure if you sit down and listen to the stuff you've done and you really analyzed it, you're going to find that not everything is shit. And yeah, fair enough. Maybe only 10% of what you've done is actually great. Maybe it's 20, maybe it's 30, maybe it's 60%. Who knows? But it doesn't matter. The truth is that not everything you've done is shit. You're simply taking perhaps the majority of your observations and summing it to the perspective that everything you've done sounds like shit. It's really important to recognize the things that you've done right and realistically look at the quantity and the quality of that. If it is only 10% of what you've ever done musically, amazing. That's, I'd say, almost 10% more than what most people who dabble in music will ever accomplish. 10% is actually quite a lot, because you can stir that around and take something and turn that 10% into 15%, 20%. And this is what takes us back to the mindset of progress. If you're not focusing on progress and you're focusing on the, absolute sum of the current situation, then you will never be able to grow, because you're always looking at the majority of what you've done. You're going to look at that majority and say, well, there's so much of it that it might as well be 100%. When in truth, it's really 90%, maybe it's 80%, maybe it's 60%. And the solution is to focus on the things you've done right, learn from that, take it to the next thing and do something better, improve upon it. And next, it's going to be 20% of what you've done is actually good. And then over weeks, over months, over years, you can turn that to your favor. You can actually say, hey, most of what I've done, which could be 51%, has been good stuff. And from that standpoint, most of what you've ever done has been great, but it could be 51% against 49. So yeah, focusing on bettering yourself, focusing on progress, focusing on the process is everything. I hope that helps. I love you, man. You need to push forward. You need to push onwards. I believe in you. There are plenty of people who already enjoy a lot of the music that you do. Never forget that. Appreciate whatever you have going on for yourself. Focus on the improvement. Focus on bettering yourself. That is the solution. Finished.